Jacob Crockett, thank you so much for being here.
Excited to be here. It's a pleasure.
We're going to have, I think, a very fun and interesting conversation today about the habits of successful software developers, right? And there's going to be a lot about perception versus reality and identifying some of the good things and the bad things that developers can do and things that affect them on the day-to-day work, right? Um, but let's get started with the basics and tell the audience, what do you do today for a living, Jacob?
Yeah, so I work within a startup incubator called Nerd United, helping to run a project called Perspect. So Perspect's a developer productivity tool that doesn't suck, right? We believe there's a lot of productivity tools out there that have kind of missed the mark and have started optimizing for things that aren't being helpful. And we're trying to build a productivity tool for developers that actually brings value to the individual developer and pushes them to be better instead of just giving more data and ammunition to a manager to decide who gets cut from the team when budget cuts happen.
Tough balance right there.
Yeah.
Um, what what problem were you trying to solve? The fact that there were tools out there, but they were not working. Um, and what do you think this problem exists?
Yeah. So it started with the idea that within a company, there's some roles that are really easy to measure their impact, and others that aren't, right? If you're looking at, a bigger company, you have a sales team, and the revenue that they generate is very obvious, and it's so close to their activities. The outcomes are close to their activities. And different roles, get different recognition and acknowledgement for those things, right? Salespeople can make crazy amounts of money if they're good at their job, because it's very easy for them to tie directly and say, "Hey, I brought $1 million to you. You should give me a chunk of that." That doesn't exist for lots of other roles, and specifically software developers. And so trying to prove the impact that software developers have in a business, not just, how many lines of code are written, but actually the impact. And so that's a massive problem to try to carve off, which takes a lot of data inputs, right? My background's in data science, research and development. And so I get excited about these really big kind of hairy problems, but we've pared it back a little bit. Our long ambition is still to be able to measure and prove the impact that a developer makes, right? To be able to recognize them, be able to show, hey, here's this dev who did this thing that caused this company to be successful. And it's rarely an isolated event, but being able to show, who contributed to this, instead of it just being, in the news, you hear about big tech companies and it's the kind of the salesy CEO who stands up and takes all the credit, when there's likely people who did amazing things behind the scenes. And obviously they may not want to be recognized in the spotlight, and that's not what we're implying, but that they could get the recognition and it would stick with them to be able to say, "Hey, I did this thing that made this impact."
And how does that work? Tell me a little bit more about how does Perspect work in that sense?
Yeah. So we're right. In order to be able to say X caused Y, of like this action that a developer took caused this business outcome, there's a lot of data that we need. The data that doesn't exist right now, and I haven't been able to find somebody who's doing this, and if so, I want to know. But being able to say, "Hey, here was this like ticket in Linear or Jira or whatever, and when this was shipped, when it was deployed, some GitHub action ran, the number of daily users went up, or some business outcome was changed." And so the closest you get, I think, is you have products like Amplitude that will look at product analytics and are often used as kind of success metrics for product managers, where they're like, "Hey, I shipped this thing, it changed this." But it's not all connected. And so being able to see that, that's our goal. We're starting at the very, very beginning of it, right? And trying to provide value along the way. And so what Perspect does now is it tracks the time and the effort that a developer puts into their work and where it's going, right? Looks at what get projects, um, how they're spending their time. Is it very concentrated? Are they getting kind of flow state deep work? Or is it scattered and very distracted? And then gamifying that as well, right? And so um, helping developers be incentivized to have better working habits along the way.
So you are probably already sitting on a lot of fun data, interesting data, right? What
Yeah.
have you learned so far at Perspect? We did run a few surveys, you and I.
Yeah.
Do you want to compare what they say versus what your data is showing?
Yeah, so our surveys, I think we got the most common answer was that people think developers spend 4 hours a day coding. It's been funny, right? You think if you're a developer, you think you probably have a better idea of how much time you spend actually coding throughout the
Right.
day. Um, I've talked to developers or developer managers, and they're like they have a decent guess. It's funny to talk to the business people who are like, "Oh, my developers better be coding 8 hours a day." And I'm like, "Well, what's the thing you get paid for? Is it sales calls? Do you have 8 hours of sales calls a day? Or is it like planning the roadmap? Are you planning the roadmap for 8 hours a day? No, of
Right.
course not, right? You're not delivering on like the thing that you're doing." And so, right, the surveys we did on LinkedIn were fun. We got 4 hours was the most common answer. We
Six
see on
hours?
app
6 hours was close. There were a lot of people
six
that
hours
thought
was
that six,
close,
it was close.
which there's very few people that we've seen who get 6 hours of coding.
Right. Right.
It's that would be exhausting. Um, right. The way Perspect tracks it is essentially when you start with Perspect, you sign up with an account, you run this background, you run this bash command, right, in your terminal. It starts a background process on your machine that then we have all these different open source integrations that you can install them with the applications you already use in your workflow, right? It takes about a minute per one. You install it once, and then whenever you live in an application, it sends little just application. It doesn't send any of the data you're working on. Doesn't, right? It's not a keylogger. There's all these kind of privacy concerns, and it's something fun to work through. But it sends these pings, and then we can crunch that data and be able to come out and say, okay, how long did you spend doing something? And so it's literally looking at like how long were you coding, not like were you sitting there saying you were coding. It's how long were you actively doing things. And
Right.
so we get on an average, we see on an average day, developers are coding about an hour and a half a day, like
Wow.
85 to 95 minutes is quite average. I spoke with our amazing full stack dev this morning, and he was like, "Yeah, yesterday was fantastic for me. Like one of the most productive days I've had in a month." He said, "I coded 3.5 hours."
What do they spend the rest of their day on?
Um, you have a lot of browsing as well, right? So we track and then different applications and then group them into categories right now. Eventually, we'll probably make it such that you can customize kind of what type of activity falls into what bucket. You have about 2 hours of browsing activity, right? And some of that we haven't broken it down yet. Some of it may be, you know, you're on Stack Overflow, or some people actually will code in a browser as well. Right. Pretty much
ChatGPT,
all of the
maybe.
desktop tools. Yeah. Pretty much all of the desktop tools now have a browser version. So we get a lot of people asking, well, hey, I use Figma or Notion or Google Colab in a browser and it's all getting tracked as browser. Can you like split that out? And so that's on a roadmap. But yeah, people spend about 2 hours browsing. You got about another hour or so communicating, sometimes closer to 2 hours. And so we see on average about 7.5 hours clocked a day, um, which if you're working from home, that sounds about right. If you're in the office, that's impressive. Like to be
Yeah.
at your computer doing stuff for 7.5 hours. I get sucked into stuff all the time that's just in person conversations. And so
Yeah.
it Yeah, it's really interesting to see how people are spending their time, but then also like right with what you said, how people are comparing it with what they expect. You know, if I'm like,
Amazing.
oh, it's very similar to pretty much anything you track, right? Um, this is like not super novel anymore because everybody wears some sort of fitness tracker, right? A Fitbit or an Apple Watch. When they first came out, people were like, "Oh, I'm sure I'm super active. Oh, you're supposed to get 10,000 steps a day. I get it." And they're at like 2,500. And so then you have people that are like, "Oh, well, now I'm going to be I'm aware of it. I'm going to be mindful about it. And so, I'm going to take that half hour walk after lunch that gets you 3,000 steps."
Right.
And so, or hey, I'm going to take the long way around the building when I go to use the restroom. And so these types of things, right? We're seeing a lot of kind of just self-optimizing activity in Perspect where we released this feature that shows how many flow minutes people are spending time in, right? Like undistracted work, not bouncing around to communication activities, just focused, no breaks greater than like 2 minutes. From before we released it, right? We released it early February to after. There's been a 10 to 15% increase in flow time, right? Deep work. Um, which has been super interesting to see that even just the awareness, right? We're not really doing anything to tell them to do more, but just the awareness of it is creating change.
So who is the ultimate customer here? Is it the developers? Is it, you said something about managers misusing tools in the past. Who
Yeah.
is the ultimate user here?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're building this for developers, developer first, right? There's lots of utility for companies, and we're figuring this out as we go. But we want to build something that developers love, right? There's very few products that developers love enough that they're willing to pay for themselves. We've asked a lot. The most common answer is some like JetBrains IDE that developers are like, oh yeah, I'll pay for JetBrains Writer. Like I'll pay the $100 or whatever it is a year to use that, even if my company won't. And there's very few other things, little widget kind of things that they'll pay for. Um, you could We hypothesize that Perspect will help developers right now in its current form increase their productivity by having more deep work time, right? There's
Right.
studies that show that developers who are intentional about deep work are 50% or more productive than their peers who aren't. And so just being intentional about your work if it can boost productivity or your deep work time and protecting that focus time, if it can boost your productivity by that much, we believe that it's a new model and we're working towards this, but we believe that companies as well will be motivated to incentivize their developers to use something like this, even if they have no insight into it. There's similar things so I come from a background in healthcare. I've only really been in like tech for kind of 2 years. Um, there's lots of companies out there, insurance plans, healthcare plans, these incentive plans that the employer will have no insight into what their employees are doing, but they'll know, hey, if they walk more steps, they'll be healthier and they'll actually be more productive employees. They're willing to pay a huge premium, and it actually will pay and reward their employees to do these things. Um, and they're willing to pay that. And so we're hoping,
True.
to channel that kind of different model of, can we build something that developers actually like? We're not going to sell out to some manager who wants to micromanage their team and know everything they're doing, right? We've been on like discovery calls with managers who say that, and we end the call and we're like, hey, this does not a fit. Like we have fundamentally different beliefs. Um, like good luck. And then there's people, right? Like we got on that call and right, we clicked on this idea that, hey, developers are amazing problem solvers, like usually the best you can hire. Why don't you just empower them and let them solve their own problems and improve themselves, and you'll be in a way better place.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of people we're trying to both bring on as developers, but then also, partner with and just gain a better understanding of what companies who have that culture, what can we build, right? There may be a view where you could see a team and see very high level habits and patterns and trends that aren't at an individual level, not weaponizable, and really just empowers the team, right? At the end of the day, this kind of data we were talking with a guy from Google. He's a data scientist at Google. His name's Spencer. And he used to be at Walmart. And he said there was a time at Walmart when he was getting sucked into all of these different projects, but
Right.
was really trying to deliver on this innovation team work he was doing. And so he started tracking on a spreadsheet how much like deep work, uninterrupted work time he had. And after 3 weeks, he went to his manager and said, look, like you agree that you want me to be building this stuff. I have like 20 minutes a day because of all these other things and I'm getting interrupted. And he was able to weaponize it like against his manager to say, hey, he's flipping the tables and saying, I
Yeah.
need more time. And so she said, great, I'll back you up. Bail, like cancel any meeting that gets put on your calendar. Like refuse to go if you have work to do. And it made the biggest difference. And so we were talking with him and he's like, this is amazing. Like this is what I've been doing manually for years, and the ability to be able to say, hey, manager, support me in these ways because here's where I do my best work.
Yeah.
And so it's really exciting, and we're still obviously still growing and evolving. We just hit our 1,000th user sign up this morning. Um,
Congrats.
so thank you. Yeah, so we're really really excited about that. But yeah, it's really exciting to see the way that it's already started impacting how developers are changing on their own, right? And it's starting to have a ripple effect at companies where multiple people are using it too.
Beautiful. Jacob, what do you see are the biggest sources of diversion for developers? What are they telling you as well? What is the data showing, and what are they saying?
Yeah. It greatly depends on the company and the project that they're working on. Most often it's communication things, right? You have meetings being put on calendars, Slack. In some companies where there may not be as strong of a like culture or somebody who knows how to do good tech, right? They'll like customer service reps will get in smaller companies, of course, but they'll get the cell phone numbers of developers and just call them and say, hey, this isn't working. Can you fix it right now? And so that obviously like destroys all productivity for
Yeah.
the thing that they're trying to do. Arguably, it's valuable to the business, but there's a better way to do it. And so those really, it's the people kind of distractions. There's some there's a really cool company. Also, so Perspect. So we're out of Utah in the U.S. About 30 minutes south of Salt Lake City, and there's a company also in Utah out of Park City, right, where everybody goes skiing, called DX. And so they're approaching it from a kind of a different angle, but it's really really cool. It's some former GitHub and LinkedIn people there, and it's all survey based, where it's once a quarter or however frequent you take the survey and you have your developers stack rank. Hey, what are the things that are like the worst experience for you? How do you get distracted? And then the team just all huddles around, hey, here's what we're going to try to improve this next quarter. Is it our CI/CD pipeline? Does it suck? Great. We're all going to try to make it better. And it just improves the experience and the productivity there. And so that's super powerful at a team level. And we're just kind of starting at different ends of the spectrum.
Nice.
But
It's
yeah,
like a
there's lots
quarterly
of
retrospective.
yeah, it's super interesting.
But you're giving daily feedback, right? I think the immediate feedback that
Yeah.
you're giving, that's kind of the Fitbit thing of okay, how did I do today, right? How can I get better tomorrow? You don't have to wait.
Yeah.
You're looking at the data real time. You're seeing how how your day was, and comparing against how you felt your day was. Um,
Yeah, you're changing the measurement paradigm from, like you have points on a graph every so often. And this is similar, like you have these surveys, you have like one-on-ones or whatever, right? You have these data points. But you can start to build a curve, like because it's so frequent. And so you can change the frequency at which it's happening. One other thing that we're trying to bake into Perspect as we build it, right? Companies are very different depending on where you work. Like some have great culture, horrible tech practices, like a ton of tech debt, all this stuff. Others have amazing tech, um, and just there's all these things, right? Some are big, some are small. We're trying to build for a developer in a way that perspective is valuable independent of where you work, right? That it doesn't matter how many, like, it doesn't matter if you have a project manager and a product manager, or it doesn't matter if you're literally the only person building it. Like, you'll get insights and value out of what Perspect is giving you.
So stakeholders share a lot of, we're talking about optimizing deep work. We're talking about optimizing
Yep.
that flow minutes, right? How many flow minutes of deep work do you have during the day? And the way we organize work and the way other stakeholders interact with developers have a lot of impact. You just said it. A customer service team is calling the developers right away to
Yeah.
their cell phone, right? That's disrupting the whole thing. So
Yep.
Stakeholders have a lot of blame here, but you're giving the developers tools to interact with those stakeholders. Is that how you see it?
I think we're giving developers a better way that they can understand how they're working and how, right, the effects of their stakeholders on them.
Right.
And so giving developers a way that they can see, why they may not actually be getting things done or being as productive as they want. We're not quite to the point of being able to like take it and just, like send some passive aggressive email to a stakeholder and be like, hey, you asked for this thing, but then you called me 5 times and added 10 meetings to my calendar. So it's gonna be 2 weeks late.
Right.
But we've daydreamed about things like that, where if you could have a team and you have these developers, they could also be giving, kind of survey feedback on their managers and like how empowered they feel and all these different questions that show how good a culture is, right? Some of the researchers that have been, I think they're on the board, or they've been working with this DX company. They wrote a book a while ago called Accelerate. Right. It was big in the DevOps world. And in there, they reference, I'm blanking on the name of it, but they reference this culture survey. And we've played around with the idea, you could come out with stakeholder scores that then could reflect and say, hey, stakeholder, you may understand tech and you may think you're great, but like, here's ways that you could improve based off of the experiences that your teams are having.
Right. And I was going to ask you about Agile, right? Because there's this whole thing about Agile was created, part of the manifesto and everything is to allow developers to get into the, to deep work and allow them to just work on solving their problems. And that's why, there's ceremonies. Let's just, talk about one of the Agile methodologies, Scrum. Ceremonies are, very structured, very short. I'm a developer, I have a daily meeting, it's supposed to be short, and then I'm supposed to be able to go and work on supposed, right? And we keep saying supposed, right? And then there's supposed to be like a Scrum Master that is kind of, it's like the ombudsman. It's like the defender of the people, defender of the developers, that should be making sure that that's how we are working, right? And as you keep saying, it's like Perspect, it's becoming kind of a Scrum Master, right? Or it could be the perfect tool also for the Scrum Master as an advocate of the team to make sure that they have healthy habits. Have you thought about it that way?
Yeah. No, yeah, it's super interesting, right? One thing we get asked a lot to build in is the idea of being able to take tickets. Everybody's like, oh yeah, I want to move this Jira ticket into Perspect to be able to say, I'm working on this during this time, and then being able to like check it off or not when it gets done, right? And it's like, hey, did you do what you thought you were going to do? And to integrate Jira in there. It'll get really complicated when we start doing that because every company works differently. We'll probably do it eventually, but I don't think anytime soon. The interesting thing with Perspect becoming kind of a Scrum Master, 100%, it's becoming the accountability of like, hey, how much did you do what you thought you were going to do? How did you spend your time? Often I think the agile, right, the implementation is carried out very differently at very different companies. And there's the kind of the you have all these politics within companies of, people want to provide value. They also want people to think they're providing value because that's how you get compensated and recognized for it. And so it comes back to like where we started is how do you show value creation and impact within tech teams? And
Yeah.
so I think that oftentimes there's, depending on the company size, right? Sometimes, and the project managers or whoever's helping carry it out, the product managers, you have different implementations of agile. I think sometimes it's super effective. Sometimes it like makes things way worse. It just
Oh
all
yeah.
depends on how it's carried out, and like, do you care more about the work getting done and the value that's being shown through those ceremonies, or do you care more about the ceremonies themselves?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Today I was talking to someone that said the issue is not Scrum, is Scrum bot, right? And he said most people I know say they implement Scrum, but they change something this way or that other way, right? So Scrum bot becomes the methodology, and that ruins everything. Which I thought was very funny. Um, so you're building something for developers, but as I continue listening to you and as I talk to other people, and have you ever thought about other white collar type workers facing similar challenges and expanding perspective to those areas? You come from another area, and you
yeah,
said, hey, bosses don't know what what I mean. We don't want to weaponize it for bosses, right? But they were using it in the
yeah,
right way, just for the people to get healthier, right? So, um, are you thinking about other industries?
yeah. So about 20% of our current users don't code,
Oh,
which has been fascinating, right? Because we've been optimizing this for people who code, and so there's a lot of features in Perspect that like show like how much of your time is dedicated to which like Git projects and branches, and if somebody's not coding, it's worthless. Like you like it's not like your Notion document is associated with a Git project.
yeah,
And so yeah, there are people using it, and I think it's really just it's become like a just accountability tracker and measure of how are you spending your time,
yeah,
and which is really powerful, right? There's another product out there that we so as we built out Perspect, right? We started, there's an open source project called Time that was
yeah,
really a automated, lots of developers that have been around for a while and know about it. It's been around for 10 some years. Essentially it's automated time tracking for
yeah,
devs, for like freelance devs, to do like timesheets, and it brings in a ton of different things. So we forked it, built some different stuff, changed it a bunch. But it's a similar thing of, hey, how are you spending your time? And where are you spending your time? And it's just, it's a Fitbit for, well, I think at one time point, Time's tagline was, hey, Fitbit for software developers.
right, right, right,
And
right,
so it's just how are you spending your time? What are you doing? And it's been really powerful for other people too that aren't coding to see, hey, how much time are they spending on Slack? How much time are they spending doing other things? We have a couple designers using it, and they like to be able to see, when they get in flow state using Figma, and being able to like see deep concentrated work on activities that they view as the most valuable.
right. I like that you continuously try to go back to adding value to developers and avoid the tool being weaponized for micromanagement. Going back to that, I mean, one of the questions we asked to the audience prior to recording this podcast was, how do you measure, if you're running software development teams, right? How do you measure their impact? And the options were lines of code, time coding, velocity to release features, and business impact of features, right? Majority of people are saying business impact of features. 0 votes on lines of code, 0 votes on time spent coding. Now, I have to tell you, I've been working in technology for the past 4 or 5 years. That's not what I've seen in reality. I've seen a lot of people that have a lot of focus on,
Yep.
on the wrong stuff, right? I mean, I think we got great service and we got the great answers here, and I see that as a sign of maturity and readiness. But in practice, I've seen a lot of people just, go back to the time, right, and not just, what's the impact of what you are releasing. And as you said back to the beginning, like, where do you get Perspect to a point where somebody works on a ticket, releases a feature or whatever, and then there's a huge business impact and it's improving, right? And we go back to that. That's because that's the ultimate value, right? Solving a business problem. That's it.
Yeah. I laughed out loud when I saw the survey and how many people were saying, oh, business impact.
Yeah.
I think it's because people say, oh, I want business impact. And then if you ask, okay, well, how do you measure that? They'll say, well, our approximation is story points.
Right.
With story points. And so then it's, okay, how do you get to story points? Well, we have this scrum ceremony where we have our estimation meeting and we sit down and who decides what the points are? The developers, because they know best. Great. So if you're measuring business impact of developers off of something they're estimating, they just inflate it, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're like, oh, we need to do more, we need to have more impact, right? I mean, all developers out there like are like, oh, okay, well, yeah, maybe it's a 3 instead of a 1.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, well, those story point estimates aren't supposed to be time spent. It's supposed to be complexity.
Yeah.
But what's a 3? It's probably a full day. Maybe it's 2 days. Like
Yeah.
it all comes back to like
Time.
the granularity of time. People are salaried, but what is that? It's 40 hours a week. And so, or you have people who are, like the finance department in a company is going to say, hey, Kim, how do we account for the money we spent on development? Oh, it's time.
Yeah.
And it's just, it all falls back to that. And you end up in this, like measurement paradigm where, so there's this law. I feel like not very many people are familiar with it as Goodhart's law. That's who it came from, right? But it's this idea that when a metric becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So anytime that you have a metric and you say, this is what we want to hit, it's not going to be a good measurement of the system anymore because people will optimize for that and they'll game it. And there's very rarely a perfect measure, right? If you have a company and you say, hey, we're optimizing for revenue, and they have some mission of like, hey, we want to like save the oceans, but we're optimizing for revenue, you'll lose.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll lose. And so it just gets so complicated and convoluted that's why we've shifted to be like, we're not going to establish some metric that we say, hey, this is what you want to optimize for, because every company is different. Everybody's going to game it. And people hate that. Like they hate being held to some standard that they know isn't actually impacting what they want it to.
Yeah.
And so we're just starting with, hey, how do we incentivize good developer behavior in a way that makes things better no matter where they are?
It's a great answer, but you just opened a rabbit hole, a Pandora's box.
It's a can of worms.
It's a can of worms, right? You just opened, I mean, like goal setting, metrics, KPIs, everyone listening. Look, I had a meeting yesterday with my leadership team and we were talking about OKRs and KPIs and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And we were trying to be as honest as possible about it, right? And we had a lot of reds in there and we were being like, yeah, I have, out of my 5, 4 are red, right? And that's okay. And we will talk about it and see why and then how to improve. Yeah. But over and over in my 15 years of experience working also for corporate big companies, et cetera, yeah, people game numbers, right? It's a numbers game. And it's part of surviving in a corporate environment. It's, part of it is knowing how to game the system and how to do and show that you do, right? Yeah. So as you were talking, I was like, he's right, but we also have to have some metrics, right?
So yeah, you have to have some measure, right? OKRs, I feel like do a little bit of a better job, right? Because you have an objective that's like, hey, here's something, and it can kind of be wishy-washy. Yeah. And then here's the key results of how we'll know if we've gotten there.
Yeah.
And things that we think matter, right? All these like guardrail metrics. And so it's something we have to do. It's just good knowing that like, hey, anytime you set something, if you also don't have the culture to back up, like, your leadership team came to you, they trusted, that when they say, hey, 4 out of 5 of my metrics are red, that you're not going to say you're fired on the spot. Right. In cultures where they fear that would happen, of course they're going to game it. You know, like this morning, I'm pulling these average numbers of time developers spent, and I'm laughing with this other dev that I'm talking with, and I'm like, you know, it's so funny. There's 15 different ways I could pull this number, and it would change it every
Yeah,
single way.
yeah,
And it's
yeah.
just this game of like, well, what does it actually mean? What does it matter? And I'm like, well, I have no incentive to like try to sway it. So I'm just going to look in the way that I think is best. But you could have people argue, and this, right, this is where the data nerds really kind of go on a power trip where they're like, well, here's the best way to look at it, or here's the most honest way to look at it. But then when you take it to the business, it's like, well, you can't have 2 paragraphs justifying the SQL filters that you put included for a metric. It's just,
Right.
here's what we think is the best one. And it, right,
It's
the world's
weird, and you
complicated.
can
People
play
are
games, right?
complicated.
Average,
Yeah.
median. I mean, you if
Yeah.
you're a data nerd, you can get so deep into like, what do we include? Where do we start counting? When do we stop counting? You know, what
Yeah.
comes into this period of time? Oh, did we intentionally? I mean, financial guys, right? Books
Yeah.
and quarterly reports and 10Ks and all of that. I mean, it, the best CFOs out there. I mean, they work magic with those reports,
Yeah.
right? But this is for another episode. You know, we need to do another one. Just talk about data science and how there's no data without a story, and there's no story without data.
Yeah. It just spins.
Yeah. um. So what's next for Perspect?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So one part of Perspect that I haven't really talked about. So we right, we want people to get the credit for what they're doing, right? This whole, you know, you come and when you apply for a job or you're talking to somebody, you know, you apply for a job, you can send them your LinkedIn, which usually has like a little bit more than your 3 or 4 bullet points of like the impact you had at a company. And then you have the stories that you can tell during an interview. And it greatly depends on, you know, how good are you at telling those stories. Um, and that's the impression people have of you.
Yeah.
We want to create a more holistic view of somebody's impact and how they work. That there's times when you want somebody, right? We're talking about developers here. You want a developer who can come in and interact with the business and talk and understand the business problems and then translate it with the team or their own work. And there's times when you already know what you're trying to do, and you just want a developer to come in and build. And you
Yeah.
don't care if they have social skills to talk to a dog. Like it doesn't matter.
Right.
And so being able to create those kinds of insights and I don't want to use the word profile, but kind of a representation of how somebody works is really important and really powerful, both for an individual to understand how they work and for a potential future employer or teammates to understand that. One thing we're doing as well, right? We've talked about incentivizing developers. So we're building this. So we're in so Nerds United is a blockchain incubator. All of the companies in it are related to blockchain. Most blockchain projects out there are like, hey, we got this amazing idea. We launched a token, all these things. Like it's going to be huge. It's going to be huge. And that's the message they keep saying. And they never actually release anything that works.
Right.
Or if they do, it's like really crappy. We started the opposite way. We're like, hey, let's build Perspect as a very much a traditional software Web 2 product, get it to where people are actually getting value. And then let's take the not hype parts of blockchain and bring it in where it makes sense. So the things where blockchain makes sense for this is writing people's contributions, a summary of their contributions on chain, where there's an immutable record. Your employer doesn't own it, right? We're not gonna steal things that people are working on and put them on chain, but it's gonna say, hey, here's the type of work you did and how much time you spent and how you did it. We're gonna write that on chain where you now have access to it. Everybody can see it. It's there. Nobody's gonna be able to go in and change it. Also, being able to reward people, right? There's this idea of smart contracts that we're in the middle of deploying one right now, where people can get rewarded for the work they're doing with cryptocurrency. And so this is kind of our next phase of how we're experimenting and playing with the gamification of, right, human behavior. This all comes down to really behavioral economics and how people react to different things. And that's why the productivity measurement game is so hard and complicated, is because yeah, it's numbers, but it's humans.
Yeah.
And so it's not just can you change numbers, it's everybody has different perspectives they're coming with when they come in and then experience a platform. And so we're building out a way that, hey, how can we incentivize people to, wherever they are, be better and try to do better and make a healthy gamified experience out of it. We've spent a lot of time on gamification, and right, there's very black hat, think casino ways to gamify products. And you leave a product experience or your time on an app or something not feeling good about yourself. You like worry about it. And
Yeah.
so we're trying to do, more white hat where, hey, it drives to a bigger purpose and you feel better about it. Yeah,
So
I could ramble about this all day.
no, no, that's amazing. So like spending more time with deep work, having bigger contributions, helping someone else, all of that stuff gets rewarded, and then I get a badge plus cryptocurrency.
Yep. Yeah, so we're starting to tie together, right? At the beginning, I talked about this huge vision that really, I think anybody who spent any time in the space is like, yeah, right, good luck.
Yeah.
Like, you can't do it. It's still we're assuming we can get to it. It's not a for sure possibility. But what we do know is we can provide value along the way. As we start to build, we can build a product like Perspect that, hey, it's valuable, that it measures and incentivizes deep work, right? There's a ton of research out there that's valuable. Nobody can argue with that.
Yeah.
They can argue we're not doing it in a good way. And that's right. We want all the feedback we can get. But as we move along, and so this is bringing in this blockchain aspect of both, writing people's contributions on chain, right? You can take a summary and put it on there. So it's there, it's accessible. Nobody can come in and change it. And then also actually adding more than like points in a game to being able to give cryptocurrency as well. And so the incubator that we're a part of, Nerd has helped to launch a community around a blockchain called the hyper blockchain. And so then the token that the hyper blockchain is, the native token is called Eon.
Okay.
It's kind of a little nerdy play on words, right? Hyper and Eon is Hyperion together,
Okay.
so a Greek god. And so we're using that blockchain, right? Anybody who's in crypto at all, right? You've seen in the last, right? This is March 15th. Bitcoin's hit like all-time highs 4 times in the last week. The gas fees on Ethereum are ridiculous. It's like the other day I went to go do something. It was like $80 for a transaction. Right? It's not feasible. So we're building this on the hyper blockchain where, right, gas fees have been established to be super, super reasonable, and allow for all these kind of high frequency interactions as you're writing contributions on chain. And so that's kind of the whole picture of where we're at and what we're building towards.
What do you think about timelines? Is this something we're going to see this year? We're for people listening, right? And they are getting excited. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so we starting tomorrow, we'll be sending out Eon is the cryptocurrency we'll be rewarding people in. We're sending that out daily based off of the activity. So that starts tomorrow, right? We also have our public launch, right? We've been in beta. I like to think we'll always be in beta, but our public launch is tomorrow. We're starting on Product Hunt. So hopefully we've won it when everybody listens to this. But yeah, so we're out there. Yeah, the contributions being written to chain. So we have a proof of concept that we built in the last couple of weeks. We're playing around with what's the most useful way to do it, right? You have these ideas where people are like, oh, we make NFTs. And then people are like, well, what's an NFT? And you're like, well, it's some like cartoon monkey that then costs like millions of dollars. And there's definitely utility across the spectrum. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we do this? Do we do kind of NFT badges? Do we do just like JSON summaries of work? And how can we represent this, right, in a way that's fun and unique and lets people feel ownership of it. It's hard to feel ownership of like a text file.
Yeah.
And so we're playing around with how do we do that? But
a badge looks good. A badge,
Yeah. Yeah, we've played around with the idea too, right? You have all these cool there's a lot of amazing technology coming out right now, right? You have the Apple Vision Pro that comes out, and you have all these
Yeah.
videos of people walking around and doing these different things. We've played with the idea of, you could take contributions and summarize them and get a ton of data and build like 3D cities that somebody could come in and visit, right? And this is a little far out, and right, nobody can hold me to this if we don't do it, right? It's just an idea, but you have this idea of like, hey, if somebody's code really sucked and they like introduced a ton of bugs, or like there's existing bugs they've introduced, you could like have literally like a dumpster fire on, like a dumpster on fire. And that's just like, just like fun little things that drive engagement and feelings of ownership. And one of the main reasons we've started with developers, other than they're like a very over targeted, under like delivered population, right, where like tons of marketing money goes at developers, and then they like have very few products that they actually like themselves. Is the reason we're doing that. Another reason we're doing that is, we're building most of this open source, like 90% of it is open source. And so we have developers who come and they're like, hey, I use this other tool. I don't use these ones, but I love what you're doing. And we're like, great, build the integration. And they do it. And then they create a PR and we merge it and it's there and they can use it. And so we're building a thing that we want developers to feel like is theirs as well, where they can benefit from it and they're part builders in it. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to do.
It's a great approach. So what technology excites you the most today? Is it blockchain because of everything that you just said? Is it the other elephant on the room? What is it?
That's a great question. So I often have joked that my career has just been playing buzzword bingo, right? Like I started off, so I studied statistics and like worked at a tech company, a hardware tech company for a little bit, and then went into data science. And right, I like rode the data science wave, rode the machine learning wave. Like now there's this AI wave. And then right, I work at a blockchain company. So like, other than don't have any AR, VR stuff. So I'm probably less.
You're thinking about it.
I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about it. I'm probably less excitable about technology than a lot of people are, just because I've like been behind the curtain on all the like ML hype and the AI hype, where I'm like, yeah, great. There's the meme of Homer Simpson where he has like all the rubber bands holding back his skin in the back, so he looks all buff. And it's like, like AI, and then it's all these if statements behind him, right? That is it's just an algorithm. Sure, there's some that's way more complex and awesome. So I don't think there's any one technology that I'm excited about. I'm very excited by practical applications of technology.
Got it.
And so like, right, the practical parts of blockchain where we can bring it into a product and actually have it add value and not just distract from it. I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited about, the potential for generative AI and LLMs, but I'm not excited where everybody's just throwing it in and then, thinking it's going to work great. And then they have something happen and they're like, wow, why in the world would it ever do this thing? And you're like, well, what do you expect? It's just barfing up words that it thinks are the most likely. Yeah. And so really excited about how, right, companies, and we're trying to do this with Perspect, but companies that are taking the very practical approach, both in like fancy things, but also in, right, like very boring applications as well. Yeah.
Good stuff. Jacob, one last question to you today. What do you do when you are not working?
Yeah, so I have 3 kids, all girls, ages 6, 4, and 2. And so I spend a lot of time with them and my wife. They keep me quite busy. A better question is, what do I do when I'm not working? And it's, before they wake up or after they go to bed.
Right.
So I just moved out here to Utah I'm from Minnesota, and I moved out here 2 years ago, and I've gotten into mountain biking. So I spend a lot of time mountain biking, which has been right, great exercise, and just, it's a blast. Out here in Utah is just gorgeous. There's mountains all over, and within 20 minutes of where I live, I can be up in the mountains, mountain biking, and see no humans for an hour.
How crazy do you go? I mean, awesome. I see these videos on Instagram, GoPro videos going down the mountains. Do you go that crazy or not that much?
Probably not as crazy as any of the GoPro videos you're seeing, because that's why you're seeing them, is because they're crazy, right? You see
Right.
like Red Bull Rampage, they're like dropping 200 feet, and it's like if they slip an inch, they're dead.
Yeah.
I don't do that. I have a great sense of self-preservation, but I'll go and I'll hit some jumps and try to go fast. But yeah, I definitely am somewhat cautious. At the end of the day, I'm like, I can't crush my hands or hit my head too hard. Like that's my livelihood. I
Do you go crazy on gear? Do you go crazy on the latest bike and the latest gear, or kind of in the middle?
I daydream about going crazy on the latest bikes and the latest gear. I'm quite good about being frugal most of the time, but in the moments of weakness, I'll buy a $5,000 e-bike and it, but then I'll use it for a while, and then I'll have to, convince myself and my wife, hey, it's time to upgrade. But yeah, no, it's a blast. I've loved it. It's been a great way to get outside and get exercise and have fun and meet people too. So it's been
Good.
interesting in the tech community in Utah, how frequently I've gotten connected with other executives because of mountain biking. That'll be like, hey, we're going mountain biking. I'm bringing my friend, and I show up, and he's like, the CTO of some like 1,000-person company, and it's been really fun to make connections that way.
Nice. I love it. I love it. Mixing what you love with what you do for work, it's the best way to
Yeah.
do it. Jacob, this has been amazing. We already know what the next episode we're going to do together is going to be about. We're going to about data, how to tell the story, how to game the data. It's going to be the dark version of what we just did. No, but I really appreciate it. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Mateo. This has been great.